A crown, lost long ago, reborn in unlife, ripped away from his only love. Invariably, all nations crumble, fall, and are forgotten. And in their final death throes, they often drag others down with them. The Histories of Empire Volume 4, Tyrus of Helia. Viego Santiarul Moloch Vol Kalahaigari was born in the city of Alovedra, the capital of Camavor, as the fourth son of Alvaro Vol Kalahaigari, known as the Lion of Camavor. Alvaro was already of advanced age when Viego was born. His mother, Leonor of Sevilla, Alvaro's third wife, tragically died giving birth to Viego. His two older brothers, Castilla and Bastilon, died young, while his oldest brother, Nivor, was destined to be the heir to the throne. As a result, Viego was neglected during his childhood and received little attention from his father. However, the young prince developed a close bond with Callista Vol Kalahaigari, the daughter of his brother Nivor and his wife Eliante. Callista was not only his niece, but also his best friend and one of the few people who offered him affection and support. She was an outstanding warrior and later served as general of Camavor. Viego received extensive training from Camavor's most respected scholars and swordsmen. It quickly became apparent that the young prince also had a talent for magic. Thus, Viego became the first mage in the royal family since the founding of the empire, presumably through the bloodline of his mother Leonor. Due to Nivor's unexpected fall in battle, it was the 21-year-old Viego who would ascend the throne after his father's death. At Alvaro's deathbed, Callista swore to her grandfather that she would look after Viego and guide his reign toward a glorious future for Camavor. She also stood by her younger uncle's side during the coronation, offering encouragement as the ceremony drew to a close. As a true symbol of legitimate rule, every king of Camavor was required to take up the spirit sword's sanctity. If one was deemed worthy, the sword would bind itself to the ruler's soul and remain so from then until his death. However, if the sword deemed the heir unworthy, it would seal the soul within itself, leaving nothing more than an empty, withered husk. And Viego was worthy. Love is cruel, yet it will conquer. Viego Vol Kalahaigari. Shortly after the coronation, Viego noticed a simple seamstress on the edge of a marketplace while out riding. Her beauty overwhelmed the young king, and he fell in love with her. A wild romance ignited between Camavor's king and a seamstress named Isolde, and the two were soon to be married. Even though the nobles and high-ranking Camavorians viewed the marriage with a woman of a lower rank with scorn, doubt, and some with disgust, the common people loved their new queen. The positive influence of Isolde's warmth and kindness regularly influenced Viego's decisions and calmed his heated spirit. After a year and a half of Viego's rule, the young king's advisors feared the neighboring kingdom as well as Camavor's enemies and allies would mistake the kingdom's unusually peaceful government as a weakness of the king and the weakness of the empire. Thus, the conquest of the neighboring kingdom of Santaros was a demonstration of Viego's power and talent as a ruler. During the celebration of their victory in the halls of the conquered Santaros, an assassination attempt occurred. Callista managed to protect Viego from harm, but Isolde was not spared. The wound was only minor, but the blade was infused with dark magic and so severely poisoned the queen. With a magical artifact, it was possible to delay the spread of the poison and its deadly consequences, but not to stop it. Viego gathered the most renowned healers and learned scholars to save Isolde, but no one found a cure. Desperate, the young king began to spend every moment he wasn't holding his dying wife's hand, searching through all the writings and records of the empire for a way to save his beloved. Stories and legends by different authors and from different eras mentioned the waters of life and the blessed isles with striking similarities. comparing all the sea routes ever recorded by the Camavorians, revealed a blank spot on the map. Viego was certain. There lay Isolde's salvation. The hopeful king reported his discovery to his advisor Negrid and his niece Callista, and told them of his plan to dispatch the Iron Order to find the Blessed Isles. The Iron Order was merely an independent military unit, but Callista was promised to their commander Hecarim. This led Viego to believe that the Order was acting in the king's best interests and that Hecarim's loyalty was unwavering. However, Callista, aware of the brutal and conquest-hungry nature of the Iron Order, insisted on leading the expedition herself. Weeks passed without Callista's return, and in his desperation, Viego continued to listen to every healer, every scholar, every magician who presented themselves to him, every charlatan and every quack. Every chance of salvation was richly rewarded, and the young king began sending riches to other kingdoms across the known world as payment and an incentive to send their best healers, artifacts and miracle cures to Camavor. While Viego practically wasted the state treasury and neglected his duties as king, unrest erupted in the kingdom, made even worse by a persistent drought. This unrest was suppressed under martial law, largely by the Iron Order. Neighboring kingdoms, such as Portacan and Al-Shalana, were conquered and plundered to bring new wealth unknown to the king and to build up supplies that the empire and especially the military desperately needed. Eventually, Isolde died, but Viego had already descended into madness. Refusing to accept his wife's death, he remained by her side and continued to attempt to heal her with magical artifacts that, while significantly slowing the process of decay, would never bring her back. Healers and magicians continued to seek audience by the king, but could only confirm the queen's death. Viego had every one of them forcefully removed from the palace, if not worse. A few weeks after Isolde's death, Callista returned to find a chaotic Elevator, a broken king, and a deceased queen. It was too late. She reported the discovery of the Blessed Isles to Viego, but she was unsure of how to proceed. The scholars of the Isles assured her that there was no cure and that the waters of life were nothing but a legend. Before she left, however, a warden of the Walls of Helya, the capital of the Isles, named Urlock Grail, approached her and presented her with a vial of the supposedly enchanted water and a waystone with which she could sail through the magical mist that protected the Isles from the outside world. Given the royal couple's condition, she decided to advise Viego against visiting the Blessed Isles. Paranoid and desperate, Viego also began to doubt Callista, begging her again and again to lead him to the Isles, and finally having her imprisoned for betrayal. She remained there for several weeks until Hecarim managed to convince her. Perhaps the king would accept the death of his beloved if the Isles scholars themselves told him that there was no rescue. Callista agreed to bring Viego, Isolde and his advisor Necrit to Helya as long as she and her military unit, the Host, would accompany him, not the Iron Order. Viego agreed, much to Hecarim's displeasure, but as a friend of the royal family and Callista's future husband, he joined the venture. A fool with power is a dangerous thing, and we live in a world overflowing with fools and power. Extract from the Helian Primer of Light. On the Blessed Isles, Viego sought the knowledge of the scholars, who decided to help the queen until they discovered that she had already died. While most of the healers abandoned the Camavorian ship in outrage, one single monk remained and requested an audience with the king and his queen. He was unable to revive Isolde, but he was able to contact her spirit and reassure the grieving Viego that she was well and had found peace. Just as the broken king finally began to accept and grieve, and Callista had hoped that everything was finally over, unmistakable shouts were heard from the mainland. Urlock Grail demanded an audience with the king and payment for the help he had provided Viego through Callista. On deck, he explained to the king that the waters of life were indeed real and that he would lead him there to revive the queen. With the lifeless body of his love in his arms, Viego followed the stranger, but the scholars blocked their path. Enraged and impatient, the king ordered Callista to strike them down. When she refused, he turned to Necrit with a smug grin and handed him the Waystone. With the magical artifact in hand, the advisor opened the protective mist surrounding the islands, and a fleet of warships manned by the Iron Order docked in the harbor of the unarmed and defenseless city. The Iron Order began looting the city. Callista desperately tried to protect the scholars and buy the ordinary inhabitants enough time to escape, while Viego, under the leadership of Urlok, advanced deeper into the vaults of Helia. Arriving at a subterranean well, the hopeful king lowered his beloved Isolde into the magical waters. While her lifeless body sank, a shadowy figure remained on the surface. Isolde's spirit had returned, but without a living body to enter, she was nothing more than that. A ghost. While Viego blossomed with joy and enthusiasm, Isolde was filled with fear, grief, rage and panic. She was dead. She had found peace. She was with her ancestors. In rage and grief, she picked up Viego's magical sword and plunged it through his heart. The magic of the waters and the weapon collided. Sanctity attempted to drain Viego's soul and destroy his body, while the water in which the still blinded king stood attempted to heal him. Black mist emerged from his wound, mixing with his blood and the magical water. The water's magic came from an unstable world rune at the bottom of the well, which reacted to the event with an unstoppable and all-destructive explosion. The Blessed Isles were completely destroyed and trapped in a state between dead and alive. From this event, now known as the Ruination, the Blessed Isles were called the Shadow Isles, and Viego's soul slumbered within his sword's sanctity. Hate me if you must. Until she returns to my arms, all will be brought to ruin. Viego vol Kalahagari. 1,000 years passed, and the restless spirit of Urlok Grail, who now called himself Thresh and was one of the most powerful beings on the Shadow Isles, freed the sealed king from his prison to feed on the resulting devastation and use his campaign to expand his own sadistic circle of manipulation. When the former king of Camavor manifested, he was weak, no longer remembering the events of the Ruination, and found strength only in his desire to be reunited with his queen. However, Viego quickly discovered that his magical abilities had been enhanced and expanded. The black mist, which constantly flowed from the opening into which Isolde once sank sanctity in her lover's breast, brought with it unimagined powers. While searching for Isolde, Viego learned that his queen's soul had split into fragments and was scattered throughout Runeterra. Thresh told him of a city called Bilgewater, which had grown into a bustling port on the nearby Serpent Isles over the past few centuries. The gathering of raiders and traders brought artifacts from all over the world. The attack on the pirate capital, however, was prevented by the Buru priestess Ilawi and a following of powerful allies. Using the magic of the Vasani Ari, they managed to confront the Mad King with the memories of the Ruination. Weakened by reliving his final moments, Viego was sealed within a powerful ancient amulet. Ilawi took on the task of guarding the dangerous artifact and investigated whether the amulet could be destroyed along with Viego. On the Shadow Isles, she found a monk who once assured the king himself that his wife had found peace. It was his order that had crafted that very piece of jewelry, and thus she learned that with sufficient heat, the amulet could be destroyed, including Viego. The only heat source powerful enough was a nearby volcano, which Ilawi then headed for. On the journey, however, she was betrayed by her captain, who was under the influence of one of Thresh's followers. He managed to steal the amulet and bring it back to the Shadow Isles, where Thresh once again freed the king. Viego began his campaign anew, but he had a powerful new ally. With the magic of the young Yordle Vex, who joined Viego due to his sinister aura and her dislike of life itself, he was able to spread the black mist and its armies of restless undead souls in various far-flung locations simultaneously. Thus, he was able to corrupt and manipulate the minds of powerful personality throughout Runeterra and gather the fragments of Isolde. Although Viego's campaign was met with resistance from an order called the Sentinels of Light, whose mission it had been to investigate the Shadow Isles and fight the monstrosities there since the ruination, he couldn't be stopped. He succeeded in opening a portal to Alovedra's former throne room and united the soul fragments there to resurrect Isolde. Once again, Viego was blinded by joy and hope, failing to notice one of the Order's members creeping up on him. Akshan was a Shuriman sentinel in possession of the Absorber, an ancient magical artifact that revives the dead should it strike down that person's murderer. Aware of the feeling of losing the person who means the most to him, he hesitated briefly, but when Isolde noticed him and sent an encouraging gesture, he fired a magical weapon at the ghostly queen. Because Isolde stabbed Viego with his own sword, the former king was revived. Shocked and overwhelmed, the king felt his spirit powers and the black mist fading away. In this moment of weakness, the Sentinels of Light managed to overpower Viego. To this day, Kemevor's king, broken by love and grief, remains sealed in the royal halls of his palace in Alovedra. In a world without love, death means nothing. Viego Vol Kalahegari.